Nigeria's north-central state of Plateau as an act of genocide against ethnic minorities resident in the state. Dacheng Bago spoke to Newsmen in Nigeria's parliament, saying there has been a lot of misinformation about the crisis, which has resisted attempts to bring lasting peace to the state. He accused the federal government of lacking the political will to tackle the crisis, saying it is being misrepresented as a farmers' herders crisis when it is actually a situation where ethnic minorities are battling to end an attempt to grab their lands and communities.
The name people have tried to catch the killings on the plateau as a communal clash. I've never seen, if it's a clash, me and you, we are fighting, we'll all go with wounds. But it's not a clash. It's pure genocide, pure land grabbing, pure chasing people from their lands. So it's not, and you see, that's the angle that if government is not seriously proactive in addressing the issue with its own name, and you're looking at it as clash, and you come to the clash is when two people are fighting, you come to the table, you settle them. But this is, I have not seen where the people that are having clash, farmers, herders clash, when it is farmers that are always chased from the land, killed on their lands are being grabbed, and you call it clash and crisis. I don't understand. The real situation, the real issue on the ground is genocide.
Now, Nigeria's out-of-school children has increased by 3 million more children within the last 1 year. This is as experts are calling for accelerated learning for many of these children in the country. One organization, which is leading the initiative in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, is urging all stakeholders to collaborate with the government to address this worrisome trend. News Central's Idong Joseph tells us more.
Available data from Nigeria's Federal Ministry of Education says about 10.1 million children in Nigeria are currently out of school. Also, the United Nations Children Education Fund, UNICEF, says about 35% children in the country between the ages of 1 and 6 have never had early childhood education. While these figures present a worrisome situation to many, experts say it is a time bomb that needs to be nipped to the bud. With efforts needed by stakeholders to address this worrisome challenge, one organization says its 3-year training program for children without any formal education will go a long way to reduce out-of-school children in the country.
We're having the highest burden of out-of-school children. It's 10.5 million. That's a huge number. So programs like this is to bring to the knowledge of the world that we have a lot to do, and there exists a community like this somewhere close to the authorities, and also calling on the need for government to do all it can to provide education for this teeming number of youths.
About 50 children have already benefited from this initiative, targeting children from nomadic families. FlexiSafe Foundation says the success of the program brings to the front burner the need for accelerated learning for the children.
Accelerated learning program meets them in their community. It helps the people in the community to buy into the project. Like you can see, all the mothers, all the people in the community are there. We assign them roles, and then we get very trained staff to come and train the children with basic numeracy, literacy, life skills. Once we are done with the project here, we train the community people how to access school, and because of the training the children have received, they are able to thrive very well in formal school.
So if you don't provide that access, they are still going to go out to school and they will be hawking, and then they will be begging on the street. So what is the solution? UBEC now, I think, with collaboration with something like this, will now take it up to the executive secretary, will now form part of our report that the program is successful. But the challenge is, what is next? They need a primary school in this community.
With Nigeria's education sector already taking a hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, available estimates say about 3 million out-of-school children have been added in the last 1 year. Experts say whatever needs to be done fast. From Abuja, Idong Joseph, News Central.
And staying in West Africa, the French Defense Minister Florence Parly has warned Mali against entering into a deal with a Russian security firm. There have been reports that Mali's military rulers are close to hiring mercenaries from the Wagner Group. Parler described the potential deal as extremely worrying, saying it would undermine efforts by France to counter the jihadist threat in the region. Wagner is believed to be operating in several African countries as Russia seeks to increase its influence. Its employees are fighting rebels in the Central African Republic, where Russian companies have secured mining concessions. Coming up on the news, Morocco records 2,785 new cases of coronavirus. More on this when the news returns. Stay tuned. Many thanks for staying with us. Now to our continued coverage of the coronavirus pandemic across the continent. We have it that in North Africa, Morocco has reported 2,785 COVID-19 cases, bringing the total infections in the country to 908,349. The Moroccan Ministry of Health says the death toll rose by 65 to 13,683, while 1,684 people are in intensive care units. It adds that the total number of recoveries from the COVID-19 in Morocco increased by 3,958 to 866,064. Meanwhile, over 20.36 million people have received the first vaccine shots against COVID-19, and over 16.87 million people have received 2 doses. Meanwhile, Nigeria has surpassed 200,000 cases from the coronavirus pandemic 18 months after the first case was identified in the West African country. This is according to the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, NCDC, which says Nigeria's COVID-19 cases has reached 200,057. The Public Health Agency also registered 519 additional COVID-19 infections on Tuesday from 14 states and the Federal Capital Territory, FCT. The NCDC adds that the new cases represent an increase from the 387 cases reported on Monday. Of the new cases reported, Lagos had 120, Ondo 110, Rivers 74, and the FCT 58. Now in East Africa, South Sudan has received 152,950 doses of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine through the COVAX facility. These single-dose vaccines are the third batch of vaccine shipments to South Sudan from the COVAX facility. Elizabeth Achoy, South Sudan's Minister of Health, says the vaccines will ramp up the ongoing vaccination program to prevent COVID-19 in individuals aged 18 years and above. The first batch of AstraZeneca vaccines were shipped through the COVAX facility to South Sudan on March 25. The second batch of 59,520 AstraZeneca vaccines donated by France arrived on August 31, and a donation from Sweden is slated for arrival soon. Still ahead, as 76th UN General Assembly opens in New York. We'll bring you details of the story and more after the break.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
Now in the world wrap, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the COVID-19 pandemic has proven to be the most challenging period the world has seen. He was speaking at the 75th session of the General Assembly close to Osho in the 76th session. Passing on the gavel to the new Assembly President, Abdullah Shahid of the Maldives, Guterres saluted his predecessor, Volkan Bozkır. The UN chief credited Bozkır for prioritizing a sustainable recovery and supporting countries as they rebuild systems shattered by the pandemic. Shahid opened the 76th session that people can find the courage to push forward, get vaccinated, and spur a greener, more inclusive pandemic recovery.
On recovering from COVID-19, vaccinating the world is my top focus. Nexus. With this in mind, I will be holding a high-level thematic debate on vaccine equity with leading experts and world leaders. On my second ray of hope, rebuilding sustainably from the pandemic, I will work with the Economic and Social Council, the United Nations system, and international financial institutions to help ensure that the socio-economic recovery is forward-thinking, that it is bluer, greener, and more resilient.
Must accelerate. We need to speed up our response to COVID-19 with vaccines, treatment, and equipment for all, not only those with the most. We need to invest in all of the systems that support human development, healthcare, nutrition, water, education, and protection, and full equality for girls and women. We need countries to commit and live up to bold climate targets at COP26 in Glasgow. The war on our planet must end. The wars on each other need to end too. It's time to focus on fighting humanity's common enemy, the pandemic. The members of this assembly must speak with one voice. We need peace now.
Meanwhile, Haiti's Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, has been banned from leaving the country amid an investigation into his alleged involvement in the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. A prosecutor is seeking charges against Henry, who has been asked to explain his links with a key suspect in the killing, Joseph Felix Badiou. Prosecutors say records show the two men had multiple phone calls hours after the assassination. Moïse was shot dead after gunmen stormed his private residence in the suburb of the capital, Port-au-Prince. Moïse's death triggered a political crisis which was exacerbated when a huge earthquake struck the south of Haiti a month ago. Now let's talk business as Tanzania's central bank says the East African country recorded a 4.9% economic growth in the first quarter of 2021. The Bank of Tanzania says this was lower than 5.9% recorded in the corresponding period in 2020. The Apex Bank says the growth was driven by construction, transport, agriculture, manufacturing, mining, and quarrying activities. It adds that the economy is expected to continue improving owing to ongoing public investment and normalization of the global economy, which will increase private sector investment and trade. The Bank of Tanzania says the performance of the external sector of the economy is facing challenges caused by COVID-19, particularly tourism. Now, the ban on open grazing by southern governors in Nigeria has continued to generate controversies around the West African country. One lawmaker from Nigeria's North Central region says the decision by governors from the south further ostracizes herdsmen, denying them their legitimate right to the business within the country. Abdullahi Adamu from Nigeria's Nasarawa State spoke to newsmen in Parliament, saying government must work towards ensuring inclusion for herdsmen with the same vigor it has provided infrastructure for private businesses to thrive.
You have corner shops all over the place. You go into the market, the roads are tarred, there's electricity, there's water supply, there are conveniences for toilets. These are for Nigerians. These herdsmen are Nigerians. The government has the same duty that all these businessmen in Lagos, in Market, in Alaba, in Onitsha, in Kano, wherever, they owe that duty to the herdsman too, because he's a Nigerian. And these provisions are from public funds. They are from the private pocket of any governor or president or senator. They are monies from the treasury of this country. And every Nigerian has a stake in that treasury. So the government has a duty and the wherewithal to make it possible or impossible for the herdsman to go astray in the course of his legitimate living.
Now, in the world of sports, Burundi's Francine Niyonsaba set a new 2,000-meter world record at the Continental Tour Gold Meeting in Zagreb. Her time of 5 minutes, 21.56 seconds, was 2 seconds faster than the record set by Genzebe Dibaba indoors in 2017. Niyonsaba, a world and Olympic silver medal winner over 800 meters, is among several athletes banned from competing between 400 meters and 1,500 meters because of naturally high levels of testosterone. The 28-year-old says she has kept competing to inspire others. While Niyonsaba is one of a number of athletes who have been forced to change events by 2019 ruling by governing body World Athletics, she has excelled over longer distances. Still talking sports, Chelsea opened their defense of the Champions League with a victory as Romelu Lukaku pierced Zenit St. Petersburg stubborn resistance at Stamford Bridge. Lukaku, a £97.5 million summer signing from Inter Milan, was again on the mark with his first goal for Chelsea in the competition they won against Manchester City in June. Lukaku broke the deadlock when he headed in at the far post from Cesar Azpilicueta's cross in the 69th minute. In the meantime, Manchester United conceded a dramatic stoppage time goal as they lost 2-1 to Young Boys despite Cristiano Ronaldo scoring on his Champions League return for the Red Devils. And that's all on the news at this hour, but before we go, a recap of our top stories. Libyan authorities have arrested 109 migrants bound for Europe in the western city, Zliten. Uganda, France and the United Nations have signed an agreement to support the UN Academy for Peace Operations. And finally, we told you that France has warned Mali against entering into a deal with a Russian security firm. Do follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store. You can also watch News Central live on Star Times channel 274, AVO TV channel 23, Vision 247, Free TV and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Rita Omodia.
Joining us and Below the Skyline this afternoon to discuss all this and more is an African affairs expert, Dr. David Matsanga, based in Nairobi. He now joins us to speak on the Ethiopian elections, the situation with the former Prime Minister of Ivory Coast, and other hot-button topics on the African continent. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Matsanga. Thank you very much for joining us on the show, Dr. Matsanga.
Thank you very much for inviting me on your show.
Now let's begin. Thank you very much.
I hope you are hearing me.
Yes, loud and clear. So we'll begin in the Horn of Africa. Let's talk about Ethiopia for a bit. The African Union has just given the Ethiopian government a clean bill of health in the performance of the elections, calling it credible elections, even though elections were not held in some regions due to the security situation there. What's your take on that?
First of all, African Union has never given any clean bill of health. Every election in Africa, the African Union Observer Mission ends up giving a clean bill.
Now, quick one. You said the African Union Observer Mission has never given any, they always give a clean bill of health. What's the reasoning behind this? Even though we've seen that elections on the continent are not always what it should be.
Well, they simply protect each other. And that's why Africa is going down to the drain. They protect each other. All these people who go to observe elections, former presidents, former prime ministers, they protect each other. There is nobody, there's nowhere I've seen His Excellency General Obasanjo telling the people that no, you a verdict of non-compliance to the African Union. That is where the problem of Africa begins from. That's where conflicts come. Yes.
Now, still talking Ethiopia, you believe the African Union is an old boys club that is just protecting each other's interests. Now, let's talk about the crisis situation in the Tigray region. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is a Nobel Peace Prize winner. The United Nations last week warned that Tigrayans, people living in the Tigray region, are close to starvation. And in an interview just a few days ago, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said there's no famine in Tigray. He dismissed all of that. What the African Union has also said, they will send an observer mission to investigate what is happening in Tigray and report back with its findings. And the Ethiopian government was very angry about that. They said this is our internal matter and the AU should not be meddling. So what's the way forward? Just yesterday, there was reports of an airstrike in the Tigray region. So this violence is not over. Humanitarian NGOs are complaining that they are not getting access to the vulnerable people in the Tigray region. And you have a prime minister that is blatantly denying reports of starvation. What's the way forward, and what's your observation of the situation in Tigray?
The Prime Minister of Ethiopia and the President of Eritrea, where you purportedly, by Western powers, to give a Nobel Prize to the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. I am one of the few people who warned the presidents around the region, including President Uhuru Kenyatta, that shaking hands with Eritrean president who harbors terrorists. You see, terrorists are in Somalia. They come and kill us in Kenya. They fight in Mogadishu. AU spends money, but where do they go? They have a fallback plan in Eritrea. So this question of double standards, double speak, we are here condemning people who went to Tigray to kill. You know who killed? Who are the people who went to Tigray to kill? Do you know why?
The Ethiopian government has said that the Eritrean forces in Tigray will start withdrawing.
Eritrean forces, can I add for you? Eritrean forces, Somali forces, and Ethiopian forces. I happen to be a friend of the late Prime Minister Zenawi and the President Isaias Afwerki. We worked together in London. They were working for Ethiopian Relief Association. I was working for Uganda Relief Association. 1987, 88, 89, 90, before they were given support to go and overthrow Mengistu Haile Mariam. I know all of them, plus Dr. Tedros of World Health Organization. He knows me. We worked together in the same office. I know who is a fifth and who is not a fifth. I know who is a good person and who is not a good person.
So, Dr. Matsanga, how do you feel? What's the way forward? Because so many people are starving in Tigray. The humanitarian crisis there is degenerating by the day. How do you feel this issue will be resolved? People always talk about African solutions to African problems. The African Union should intervene. The African Union has intervened. The Ethiopian government does not like the tone of it. They say it's an internal problem. They will deal with it. In your own experience and from what you've seen, from your observation, what do you think would lead to a lasting peaceful solution in Tigray and Ethiopia as a whole?
We need an intervention in Ethiopia, in Tigray, to protect the Tigray people.
An African Union-led intervention force?
No, a United Nations, not Africa. I don't think the AU people are divided. Both the AU people, my brother, cannot stand together. Took troops there, you will find them fighting each other. We need a neutral force that can go in to protect and make a no-fly zone over Tigray, because we can't lose all the people like we lost the Tutsis in Rwanda while watching. The Ethiopian government is, together with the terrorists across in Eritrea, are killing people in Tigray, and we should not keep quiet as Africans and watch when this is happening today in 2021. Enough is enough. Ethiopia is the headquarters of AU, and Ethiopia is misbehaving. It is showing us that we should pull out even in that headquarters to go somewhere else where we can have neutrality. Why should we have a headquarters of AU in a country that is destabilizing itself? Why? Why should Africa watch people die every day? I am of the opinion, sir, that the United Nations Security Council, and we are going to lobby President Uhuru Kenyatta, whose membership on the UN Security Council non-rotational, to bring up a motion that United Nations deploys a force to prevent further genocide in Tigray.
And the hope is that the humanitarian effort would take claim, would be prioritized over politics of the East African community and the African Union Brotherhood, because it's the people that really needs to be protected, like you rightly said, in Tigray. Now, moving away from the Horn of Africa, let's come to West Africa. The French government has said French troops in the Operation Berkane that is meant to kick out Islamist jihadists from the Sahel region and protect the people of that region. They'll be winding down the numbers. It's been more than 5 years that they've been there, and there's still a lot of terrorists roaming about and going about their business in this vast desert area. How would you score the success of Operation Berkane and generally, foreign intervention forces, that model in Africa to stop crisis?
A supervised foreign intervention force can work, but not a French intervention force. French intervention force has become a mercenary force. The French brought us the problem we have today in Africa, in North Africa. The French, under Resolution 1970 of the United Nations Security Council, bombarded Libya. They said there were weapons of mass destruction in Libya by Gaddafi. Gaddafi had checked on the terrorism that you see in the Maghreb area, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. The cells of Al-Qaeda were under control. They had not done the damage they are doing today, including in your own country, in the north, where in Maiduguri, We have Boko Haram killing people mercilessly. You see, the French have brought us all this problem. And African leaders, it's high time you woke up, you stood up.
But Dr. Matsanga, they would argue that the intervention force, the NATO-led intervention force by the United States was backed with the seal of approval by the United Nations Security Council. So it has some form of legitimacy. And it's because of the luxury of hindsight that we see that all this cross-border terrorists and that are roaming about the Sahel is as a result of a blowback from that intervention.
Don't you see that that's double standard? That hypocrisy of the highest degree. How do you back a resolution 1970? Now you cry about Libya. We are crying about Libya. We have two factions that have taken over Libya. We have terrorists moving all the way from Gambia, Senegal, Nigeria, Niger, north of Ghana, Chad. We have terrorists there, Mauritania, Mali. We have terrorists all over, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso. Everybody is becoming more or less a terrorist because of the French policy. And Africans should not be shy to say the truth.
Dr. Matsanga, if the French aren't intervening in Africa, if there's no French intervention force, the capacity of African national armies, even the African Union intervention force, we don't really have the capacity or the finances to deal with this sort of transnational terrorism. So,
my brother,
are there any other ways to address these issues?
No. Boss, my brother, when you said there's no French intervention force, what about in Chad? What about in the Central African Republic? There's an intervention force. There's an intervention force in Chad. When President Idriss Déby was killed, the French admitted they brought in a force. It is there. There is a standby force. For example, who is supporting General Khalifa Haftar, who has cut off Libya? Who? Look at what is happening to Libya. Tripoli has been taken by Turkey. Benghazi has been taken by the French. Who is supporting them? Look at the people supporting them. Egypt. Look at the way things are working. The Middle East, Turkey, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, they have all come.
So it's
the
like
war that is even disturbing the people of Nigeria.
A proxy war that is going on.
Causes. Hello?
It's like a proxy war going on.
A big proxy war. Now the French are in charge. They tell you, you tell me that the French don't know that there's Boko Haram. Why haven't they come to the rescue of President Buhari to wipe out Boko Haram? Why? Why haven't they finished the insurgency in Central African Republic? Why? They have armed, and I want to tell you this today, they have armed Bozizé. They have armed the former President Bozizé in Central African Republic. We know logistics. Who are the countries that are supplying arms to Bozizé? What companies in Paris are doing so? So they have armed it against the government that was elected in Bangui. What is this? What is this that we should keep quiet? The French have spoiled the whole North and the West Africa. Now
quickly,
they have moved to Mozambique.
Let's move on to Southern Africa for a bit, because I want us to talk on two issues before we go. We'll look at Southern Africa, and then we'll talk about upcoming elections in Kenya in 2022. Now, the issue in Mozambique, the SADC Troika did meet recently, and they said they're going to provide a Southern African-led intervention force to deal with the terrorist situation in the oil-rich Cabo Delgado part in the north of Mozambique. President Philippe Nyusi did not admit the number these forces will be. There's news that there are about 60 Portuguese soldiers, trainers in Mozambique already. What do you make about all of this? Because Total pulled out of a project they were working on in the Cabo Delgado region, citing security issues. So apart from the humanitarian cost, there's also a business and financial cost to terrorism.
My brother, thank you very much, and your viewers. I talk facts, I don't talk fiction. Total, you have said Total pulled out. Exactly. That's what I've been telling you. There is no difference between Total and the foreign intelligence system of France. Wherever you see Total, you see the DSGE or the French government policy, foreign policy working. Why do they pull out? Because why did they go there in the first place? There are oil companies that are fighting for the spring hot gas, oil, and the other minerals in the Beira Triangle. And as a result, the American companies have come in, they want to take over from the French. And my brother, I want to tell you, whenever you see France, Total Oil, you know you have seen Qatar. Qatar pays the money. Total does the drilling.
Now, quick one, Dr. Matsanga, you said wherever you see Total, you see, you kind of sound like France Afrique, the old France Afrique of the FOCA network is still ongoing, that Africa still has its purse strings tied to Paris. It's been 60 odd years since independence. Why are we still dependent on colonial powers in 2021?
Are you the only guest in Jerusalem? Who died? Boss, are you the only guest in Jerusalem who does not see that there are some countries in West Africa whose budgets are being controlled by Paris? Yes, the 1967 war between Biafra and Yakubu Gowon and Geno and Ojukwu is Total Oil versus Shell BP, period. The war started and went on. It is still there, simmering quietly. Are you the only person who has not seen that up to today, some French-speaking countries have their allegiance paid in Paris? They can't spend beyond. Niger, for example, produces uranium. The whole uranium is taken to Paris, but you can't find electricity in Niger. What type of life are we leading? What is happening in Cape Delgado is simply President Nyusi. And I'm honest, I have been 6 years ago, my brother, I wrote a report, and I will give it to you now. I know you. I will send you that intelligence report I wrote. I said there are so many people trying to be Total Oil workers when they are not. I went to Tanzania to tell the late President Magufuli, we had 15 minutes talk, and Magufuli was shocked in front of his foreign minister how 400 Total Oil workers are all like a marine shaven in Tanzania. Now, 6 years ago, they were digging a road towards the area of Cape Delgado, but Mozambique was not digging a road. So who are these people? They are mercenaries. They disappeared.
Okay.
Today
Dr. David Matsanga, I really wish we had time to touch on all the issues we wanted to discuss, but unfortunately we're out of time. I would like to say a very big thank you to you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us on the news today. We do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much once more, Dr. David Matsanga, African Affairs specialist there. And that's all on Below the Skyline at this hour. Remember to follow us on social media with News Central TV. You can also download our mobile app at App Store and Play Store. You can watch News Central live at Star Times Channel 274, AVO TV Channel 23, Vision 247 Free TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Benga Aboroa. After nearly 8 years as Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, he served as Kenya's Minister of Trade and Industry from 2002 to 2007. Mukisa Kituyi returned home to Kenya to enter what is likely going to be a bruising 2022 presidential race. Kituyi wants to be Kenya's next president. He resigned from his prestigious top post in Geneva in February and returned home to Kenya to begin the tough political journey to succeed President Uhuru Kenyatta, who is set to leave power in 2022. Kituyi's entry into politics has elicited mixed reactions from both political observers and the average Kenyan. The question is not so much if he is qualified, but how will he make it to the top seat in a country where politics is strongly grounded in ethnic and regional concerns. My guest today is Dr. Mukisa Kituyi. Thank you very much for joining us on NC Exclusive, Dr. Kituyi.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what's your assessment of the political climate in Kenya today as we inch towards the 2022 elections? How much has changed since the post-election violence of 2017?
Okay, a number of things. First of all, there was very limited fracas in the 2017 election. The main post-election violence in Kenya really happened after the 2007 elections. So that's quite a bit of time ago. And it's not like there's a political culture of violence in Kenya around election time to a large scale like what we had that many years ago, about 14 years ago. What has been of significant change in the period leading to the next election is the arrival of the COVID pandemic. That we are in a situation where we know that to do politics effectively, you need mobilization, you need public rallies, you need town hall meetings. And yet we also know the vagaries of the pandemic are real. So the challenge for some of us is how do we balance between needing to engage the electorate and having leadership responsibility not to put people in harm's way, particularly in an African setting where you don't have sufficient capture of an audience through virtual meetings like Zoom meeting. So I think this is one of the main challenges. Another challenge is a tradition of extremely expensive buying of loyalty. Now, if you are coming out of an international engagement like myself, unless you've been very, very corrupt, you're not likely to have the kind of resources to try to buy legitimacy on the basis of voter bribery. I would consider those as some of the more immediate challenges. Yes.
Now, Dr. Kituyi, you left your prestigious job as the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development to run for the highest office in the land. Why do you want to occupy State House come 2022?
All right. Throughout the years, I was a member of Kenya's parliament for 15 years, 10 of those years as a leader within the opposition. And throughout the years of my service in Kenya politics, but also and particularly the nearly 8 years of my international tour of duty, I've had the privilege to look at best practice and worst practice. I've visited different countries and I'm always asking myself, what is it that some others are doing right and we don't do right? Not just as Kenyans, but as Africans. And I have this sense that African leaders, particularly from the intelligentsia, must be the answer to their country's challenges. You must be the solution that you crave for your country. So I said, rather than being a cynical intellectual critique of bad politics, take the risk of getting in and try to right the wrongs. This is basically what drives me. I have an agenda, an idea about what is possible in Africa, what is possible with the developmental state, and what is possible with the leadership that is dedicated to the fight against corruption. And I think those are sound enough reasons for me to try to bequeath my grandchildren a better country than I inherited.
Now, I like that you mentioned your consultations with the intelligentsia, your experience in international development, and having also be grounded in Kenyan politics. You were a minister, you were a parliamentarian. Now, Kenyan politics, like a lot of African politics, is devoid of ideology. That's why you mentioned voter bribery earlier. Experience has shown that, intellectuals like yourself, no matter how qualified you are, really succeed in politics. There's a lot of politics of ethnicity and regionalism in play. So how do you plan to get your message across to the grassroots people? What will be your approach? How do you scale above ethnicity and all of that to get your message to the ordinary Kenyans and show that, look, politics doesn't always have to be ethnicity. Let's have issue-based politics.
All right. In the late 80s and the early 90s, I was a member of a small group of mostly professionals, three-quarters of whom with the PhDs from universities from around the world, who were called in Kenya politics the Young Turks. We set up the main political party that drove for the reinstatement of multi-party politics in Kenya. And at the time, it came through to me very clearly that it's not that the people are not consumers of intelligent thought. It's just that many times the intelligentsia does not know how to translate complex ideas into a language that the citizens can understand. And I have seen many cases in my country and in other countries where the intelligentsia will have an ability to translate issues into a felt community of ideas.
But Dr. Kituyi, sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Kituyi. Certain quarters will say, look, you've been in Geneva, Switzerland for the better part of 8 years. Have you not lost touch with the people on the ground?
Absolutely not. I have been coming to Kenya regularly. There's no time that it took more than 3 months without me coming back to Kenya. And also, since I came back, in this part why I left my duty station early, is to go to the people in small meetings, capture their thinking, their hopes, their fears, their challenges. I'm combining past experience and a learning experience right now, which will put me in good stead in the coming period when I properly roll out my campaign.
Now, one of your first stops after you returned to Kenya was a meeting with former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, Senator James Orengo, and Makueni Governor Kivutha Kibwana. We've seen a lot of politics of alliances in Kenya lately. Was the meeting a discussion for possible alliance?
Yeah, all those gentlemen that I met in that meeting, whom I met very many more times, I met all of them again quite a few times, are part of the team that was relatively progressive ideologically, committed to the fight against corruption, persons of substantial integrity by and large. And we are basically saying the politics of ideas has not been driven out of town. We can reconstitute coalition building around shared values, shared aspirations for the country as part of this campaign. And that's a necessary tactic for me in the period leading to the next election.
Now, Dr. Kituyi, what's your political party? What political platform would you be running on for president?
Actually, what we did is looked at the different existing political parties. In Kenya, political parties have a very, very high mortality. And most of the parties that were used in the last election have their major drawbacks. And I didn't want to inherit the negatives of those parties. So together with people from some existing political parties, others who have not been active in any of those parties, we are in the process of completing the registration of a brand new political party, which I will lead, and which will be ready to coalesce with other parties. But I will not announce the name of the party now until we formally do that in the next 3 weeks.
And that party will not be walking in isolation, because I believe you'll be looking into alliances and partnerships in the future. Just before we begin to wrap things up, what would be your priority areas if you become president of Kenya? What will you do differently?
Well, one, I will put to practice what I've been preaching as an Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, which is that the future of Africa's renaissance lies in unlocking intra-African cross-border investment and trade. To me, we optimize the resourcefulness of Africa as a continent, and I want to lead by example in that. I am aware of the dramatic change of international FDI flows, for example, the drying up of greenfield investments into Africa from the traditional sources. I want to be among the drivers of Africa's new routes of building cross-border investment. Secondly, I think the African intelligentsia owes us this continent a critical contribution building the capital resource of Africa, Africa's human capital. We have been celebrating Africa's demographic dividend without growing it as a competitive labor product. And I think that has to be one of the key drivers of Africa's revival post-COVID.
Now, finally, Dr. Mukisa Kituyi, as former Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, this year, a lot of African countries would have ratified the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement after. How can African countries benefit from this in light of a post-COVID economy? How can we make the best use of AfTA?
I think one of the key things that we have to do is resuscitate the political commitment. The driver of any resolutions of Africa's integration is genuine political embrace by the leaders. And I want to join the ranks of leaders who have genuinely believed in the future of Africa's integration. Secondly, we prioritize our own national infrastructure investment to go into integrative infrastructure. Africa has railways and roads that move from mineral resources to the coast to export Africa's raw materials. We now have to connect African populations through an integrative infrastructure. I think that's important. Number three, we have to start looking at living the dream, keeping the promise of liberating the movement of factors of production across the continent, defeat the monsters of xenophobia, and celebrate the talent that this continent is endowed with. That way, our sons and daughters will not be drowning near Lampedusa on the attempt to reach Europe because of a delusion of hope in Europe. We have to build that hope in Africa. And I am very passionate about this as one of the raison d'etre for my going into contesting for presidency.
And on that hopeful note, this is where we'll draw the curtains of today's NC exclusive. I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Mukisa Kituyi, for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today, and all the best with your endeavors.
Thank you very much, and much appreciated for the time.
That's it on NC Exclusive. Our guest has been Dr. Mukisa Kituyi, former Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and a presidential aspirant for the upcoming 2022 elections in Kenya. I'm Benga Aboroa. Until next time on NC Exclusive.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories
Hello and welcome to Beyond the Continent on News Central, reaching you live from Lagos, Nigeria. I am Rita Omodia. On our first story, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the COVID-19 pandemic has proven to be the most challenging period the world has seen. He was speaking at the 75th session of the General Assembly, close to usher in the 76th session. Passing on the gavel to the new Assembly President, Abdullah Shahid of the Maldives, Guterres saluted his predecessor, Volkan Bozkır. The UN chief credited Bozkır for prioritizing a sustainable recovery and supporting countries as the rebuild system shattered by the pandemic. Shahid opened the 76th session, noting that people can find the courage to push forward, get vaccinated, and spur a greener, more inclusive pandemic recovery.
On recovering from COVID-19, vaccinating the world is my top focus. We simply must close the gap to vaccine access. With this in mind, I will be holding a high-level thematic debate on vaccine equity with leading experts and world leaders.
We need to speed up our response to COVID-19 with vaccines, treatment, and equipment for all, not only those with the most. We need to invest in all of the systems that support human development: healthcare, nutrition, water, education, and protection, and full equality for girls and women. We need countries to commit and live up to bold climate targets at COP26 in Glasgow. The war on our planet must end. The wars on each other need to end too. It's time to focus on fighting humanity's common enemy, the pandemic. The members of this assembly must speak with one voice. We need peace now.
Meanwhile, the United Kingdom says and announced a COVID-19 vaccine booster program for older and more vulnerable people soon as Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government relies on vaccines rather than further lockdowns to navigate a bumpy winter. Johnson scrapped the last coronavirus restrictions in England in July with the aim of a return to normal. The UK Prime Minister also outlined a Plan B involving mandatory vaccine certificates in some settings, mandatory mask wearing, and asking people to work from home, which was being held in reserve. The UK has recorded 134,000 COVID-19 deaths among its 67 million people. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin is in isolation after people in his inner circle became infected with the coronavirus, but the leader himself has tested negative for COVID-19. Putin explained the situation to the government meeting on Tuesday by video conference after the Kremlin said he was absolutely healthy and did not have the disease himself. Putin, who is fully vaccinated with Russia's Sputnik V, held several public engagements indoors on Monday, most of which were indoors and where it appeared from images on TV that no one wore masks. The 68-year-old said the circumstances had forced him to cancel a planned trip to Tajikistan this week for regional security meetings expected to focus on Afghanistan, but that he would take part by video conference instead. And southern Chinese cities closed schools and ordered testing for millions on Tuesday in a race to curb a new COVID-19 outbreak, which has sparked concerns over infections among unvaccinated school children. The wide testing in Putian was ordered for all residents after Delta variant cases linked to a returnee from Singapore ballooned into a province-wide outbreak of more than 100 people. China has now been hit by multiple outbreaks of the highly contagious Delta variant after initially vanquishing the first wave of the virus last year. The Fujian cluster is the biggest rebound in weeks and comes after the country declared the COVID outbreak spurred by the Delta under control in a test of China's zero-case approach to the pandemic. China has reported 59 new domestically transmitted cases on Tuesday, up from 22 the day before, all in Fujian province. Meanwhile, China's ambassador to the United Kingdom has been banned from the British Parliament. The ban was as a result of Beijing imposing sanctions on legislators after they spoke out against alleged human rights abuses directed at the minority Uyghurs in the far western region of Xinjiang. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, and the Speaker of the House of Lords, John McFall, said it would not be appropriate for Zheng Zekwang to speak at an event in parliament while members were subject to Chinese sanctions. China imposed sanctions on 9 British politicians, lawyers and an academic in March for spreading what it said were lies and disinformation over the treatment of mostly Muslim Uyghurs. In other news, a military aircraft emergency landing and takeoff drill was held on a standard highway for the first time early Wednesday as part of Taiwan's major annual war games to test the ability of pilots and aircraft to land on the narrow road in the event airstrips are damaged by enemy forces. The Jiadong section being used for the drill is one of 5 built in Taiwan to accommodate emergency military jet landings and takeoffs in the event of war. Landing on regular roads makes logistics and resupplying easier during battles. Exercises have previously been conducted on these 4 sections. Drills planned for the Jiadong section in 2011 were cancelled due to poor weather conditions. Now, 9 veteran democracy rights activists in Hong Kong have been sentenced to between 6 and 10 months in jail for joining last year's Tiananmen vigil, which was banned by police. 3 others were handed suspended sentences on the same charges of joining an unlawful assembly or inciting others to join on Wednesday. Amnesty International condemned the verdicts as another outrageous attack on the rights and freedoms of Hong Kong people. The sentencing came 1 week after leaders of the group behind the annual vigil were separately accused of inciting subversion following a police raid on a museum in the city dedicated to remembering the crackdown in Tiananmen Square in 1989. And Haiti's Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, has been banned from leaving the country amid an investigation into his alleged involvement in the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. A prosecutor is seeking charges against Henry, who has been asked to explain his links with a key suspect in the killing, Joseph Felix Badiou. Prosecutors say records show the 2 men had multiple phone calls hours after the assassination. Moïse was shot dead after gunmen stormed his private residence in a suburb of the capital, Port-au-Prince. Moïse's death triggered a political crisis which was exacerbated when a huge earthquake struck the south of Haiti a month ago. And U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken faced bipartisan anger and criticism from senators unhappy with the Biden administration's handling of the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan. U.S. senators say the withdrawal was fatally flawed and that a full explanation of the administration will decide on Afghanistan will be pursued. Republican Senator James Rich says America cannot end a war by simply walking away. Nearly 20 years after invading Afghanistan in 2001, following the September 11 Al-Qaeda attacks, the U.S. military completed its withdrawal from the country on August 30th. Meanwhile, the Biden administration formally asked a federal judge on Tuesday to block enforcement of a new Texas law that effectively bans almost all abortions in the state under a novel legal design that opponents say is intended to thwart court challenge. The U.S. Justice Department's 45-page emergency motion seeks a temporary restraining order or preliminary injunction lifting the abortion ban, while its lawsuit challenging the statute as unconstitutional proceeds through the courts. The Republican-backed law forbids abortions performed once cardiac activity had been detected in the embryo, typically starting at 6 weeks of gestation, before many women even realize they are pregnant. It provides no exceptions for pregnancies resulting from rape or incest, though it makes narrowly defined exemptions to protect the mother's health. Governor Greg Abbott, who signed the measure into law, defended it earlier this month, saying that the state would eliminate all rapists. And that's all on Beyond the Continent at this hour. Do follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store. You can also watch News Central live on Star Times Channel 274, Avo TV Channel 23, Vision 247, Free TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Rita Omodia.
Tanzanian opposition leader has big goals for his home country following the death of Tanzania's former president, John Magufuli. Tundu Lissu plans to return to Tanzania to fight for democratic progress in a country that has experienced a rapid democratic backsliding in the last 5 years. Tundu Lissu, a member of the opposition Chama cha Demokrasia na Maendeleo, the party for Democracy and Progress, popularly known as Chadema, has spent his political career, which includes a 10-year stint in parliament, fighting for more accountable polity in sub-Saharan Africa's fourth most populous country. And it nearly cost him his life. In September 2017, he was shot 16 times in what is widely seen as an assassination attempt orchestrated by the Magufuli government. But Lissu survived, and 3 years and more than 20 operations later, he returned to Tanzania from Belgium last year, where he had been seeking medical care to contest the presidential election in October. After attracting huge crowds as he toured the country to campaign, he was defeated in a contest marred by intimidation and fraud, handling Magufuli another 5 years in office and forcing Lissu back into exile. But following the president's untimely demise, Lissu is plotting his return. Tundu Lissu is our guest today on NC Exclusive. Thank you very much for joining us on NC Exclusive, Mr. Tundu Lissu. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me on your program, sir. And I'm really glad to get this opportunity to speak to the Nigerian people.
So in the first 100 days, President Samia Suluhu Hassan is steadily steering Tanzania to tackle COVID-19 after months of inaction. She has also pledged to promote freedom of expression. What is your assessment of the first 100 days in office?
I think it is fair to say that the first 100 days of the Samia Suluhu Hassan's administration have seen a dramatic change of tone. The country, Tanzania, and the Tanzanian people were not just used to being brutally treated by the security forces during the Magufuli's 5-year term, but we're also used to verbal abuse and verbal harassment of the most horrible kind. And the new president has completely changed the tone. She is kind, she's polite, she's respectful, and I think I'll be correct if I say that the country has drawn a collective sigh of relief. Even if the largely during this first 100 days, she has not done what we expected her to do for given the horrendous problems that she inherited. But the change of tone has been very, very positive. And not just the tone, in my view, not just the tone. She has also made some very smart moves, in my view. She has changed direction on the question of COVID-19. She is mending fences with Tanzania's neighbors and the international community. And these are very welcome. These are very welcome changes for a country that has gone through a terrible time during the past 5 years.
I mean, you seem to have given the Samia Suluhu Hassan presidency, even though 100 days is quite short in the life of a presidency, pass mark. Now, you've been living in exile in Belgium since November 2020, when you fled your country, citing threats to your life after you returned to Tanzania in July 2020. This was after 3 years in exile, recovering from 16 bullet wounds you sustained in what you described as a politically motivated assassination attempt. Now that your old tormentor-in-chief, as you described him, the late President John Pombe Magufuli, is no longer around, will you be returning to Tanzania anytime soon?
I wish I could say yes, I'll be returning to Tanzania sometime soon, but unfortunately I cannot say so. And the reason I cannot say that with certainty is the government of President Samia Suluhu Hassan has not responded to my extension of hand, to my request to speak to the president, to have dialogue on the question of my return to Tanzania, and not just myself, but that of fellow exiles, those of us who were forced out of the country in fear of our lives.
And why is it important for you to speak to Excellency before you return?
I called the president's office 2 days after she was sworn in, and the message that I got was the president would get back to you once she has had some time for herself. And I'm still waiting. My leadership in Dar es Salaam have also written to her, and her office responded that she would call us to a meeting. And that was almost 3 months ago, and we are still waiting. So I cannot say when I will return with exactitude, because so far we have not heard anything from the government.
Now, Mr. Lissu, you're a bona fide Tanzanian citizen. You're free to go in and out of the country. I do understand the circumstances in which you left, but it's a different guard, it's a different government at the top now. So why is it necessary for you to speak to Her Excellency President Samia Suluhu Hassan before you make the move to return to Tanzania? Are you seeking for some type of assurance that would, so you'll be safe when you return? That guarantees your safety?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Given the circumstances of my forced departure from the country, it would be unwise for me to return back home without assurances as to my security and freedom. Yes, we have a change at the top. The president is new, but the same security forces that had harassed me for 5 years are still in place. By the way, I still face 6 criminal charges in courts in Dar es Salaam. These are completely preposterous cases which were levied on me purely for political reasons, and they're still in place. And we have called on the president to show us a hand of friendship by at least giving me and my fellow exiles security assurances. And thus far, as I have said, we are still waiting. As I say, it will not be wise to return home in the absence of those security assurances.
Now, talking about the incident that made you go on exile in the first place, the ugly incident of the assassination attempt in your life. You also had 22 surgeries post-recovery in order to get back to where you are today. Are you satisfied with the conduct of the investigations? Because I remember back then the late President Magufuli did tweet and said those perpetrators would be brought to justice. What's the latest on that?
Before I answer that question, let me just correct you a little on the subject of my treatment. I had my 25th surgery 2 weeks ago, so I'm basically still recovering from the 25th surgery. I still have one more to go in September, so that would make it number 26. Now to the question of investigation of the assassination attempt. The truth of the matter is the attack has never been investigated. Never, not at all. The official position of the police force of Tanzania is that they do not even have a suspect. They don't suspect anybody of being involved in an assassination attempt carried out inside a heavily guarded government housing compound in the midst of a parliamentary session. They do not have any suspect in respect of an attack on a very prominent parliamentary leader. And these are the kind of excuses that have made it, if they don't have a suspect, of course they cannot investigate. To start an investigation, you need a lead. You need to have at least somebody that you suspect. They don't have a suspect. They have never arrested any single individual. They have never interviewed anybody, not me, not my driver, not the people who were in that building and who took me to hospital. And so the assassination attempt was never investigated.
What about CCTV images? I mean, this is a heavily fortified housing gated community where the speaker, other parliamentarians and senior members of government live. How is it possible that in broad daylight, 1 p.m. if I'm not mistaken, lunch hour, they drive through, all those things happen and not a single footage?
Actually, that's a great question. There were CCTV footage that was recovered from the scene of the crime. And 5 days after the attack, the police force admitted in public that they had recovered the CCTV footage. But the police has never, ever told the nation what was in that footage. And then 2 years later, the then Minister for Home Affairs told Parliament that there was actually no CCTV footage. So we have a contemporaneous statement by the police 5 days after the attack, saying that they have recovered the CCTV footage, and then 2 years later, the government minister in charge of the police force says, there was no CCTV of any kind. It's just a way of covering up this heinous crime. As you say, how can it happen in a heavily guarded government housing compound where ministers and members of parliament live for this attack to take place? I would like you to know that, in fact, the security was removed completely from the compound. You can never gain access to the compound because it is guarded 24/7. That day, that afternoon, there was no security anywhere. And therefore, it was just planned. It was just planned. And what happened after the attack proves that this was just a government an assassination attempt ordered by the president. There was a parliamentary investigation which was discontinued on the day that the Parliamentary Committee on Security was to give a report to Parliament about
sorry to interject there, Mr. Lissu. You're a former president of the Tanzanian Bar Association. You're a lawyer, and you do know the implication of what the statement you just made now, saying the late president ordered the assassination. Do you have any evidence to prove this?
Let me explain myself here, and I know what I'm talking about. 2 hours before I was shot, the president was on national television and addressing the nation. And in his address, he stated that those who opposed his so-called economic war did not deserve to survive. Now, at that time, at that point in time, I was the leading opponent of his government's economic policies. And therefore, when he said that those who opposed his economic war did not deserve to survive, he was directly referring to me. And 2 hours later, these hired assassins were allowed into this government housing compound and tried to kill me. And then I say that the police recovered CCTV footage. We don't know where it ended. And then Parliament investigated the attack. And on the day the Parliamentary Committee on Security and Defense was to present its report to Parliament, it was yanked out of the program, and its chairperson and the members of the committee were dispersed. And then several months later, the clerk of the National Assembly wrote me, I have it in writing, that the government, I cannot be treated with taxpayers' money because the President Magufuli, has not authorized payment for my treatment.
But as an MP, as an MP, you are entitled to treatment by the government. The government was meant to fit your bill.
Exactly. I'm probably the only MP who has been treated the way I was treated. And I have it in writing from the clerk of the National Assembly that it is the president who prevented me from getting my statutory medical benefits. And there are all these facts, if you look at them in their totality, what other conclusion can one reasonably arrive at, if not that the government of President Magufuli and the president himself had a hand in the attempted assassination?
Now, Mr. Lissu, when you if you eventually get to have an audience with President Samia Suluhu Hassan, will these be some of the issues on the card that you would like to discuss with her? Because you went through a lot of personal trauma and grief just going through all of that. Or would you let bygones be bygones? Because the man you accused of ordering the assassination is no longer alive today.
That's a great question, my brother. Let me let you know that, in fact, I have stated publicly that now that she is the president, President Samia Suluhu Hassan has the opportunity to tell the Tanzanian people what exactly happened, who was behind the attempted assassination. And here is why. Of all the government leaders during that time, Samia Suluhu Hassan is the only government leader who ever visited me in hospital. She came to see me when I was hospitalized for 4 months.
Even
in
though
Nairobi.
she was in the ruling party? Even though she's a member of the ruling party?
Not just in the government, but also in the ruling party. And people have told me, people from within the government and the ruling party have told me that they were told by Magufuli himself that he would like to see who will go to visit me in hospital in Nairobi. So all these people who would have otherwise visited me in hospital were threatened not to dare come to Nairobi. Now, Samia Suluhu Hassan is the only one who came. Now, I have also said in public that an assassination attempt of a prominent political leader cannot just be wished away. We need truth about what happened, if for no other reason than to make sure that the truth is known so that these kinds of dastardly acts are not repeated again. And therefore, I cannot let bygone be bygone without the truth. We
and
want
also justice
to be told
and
the
posterity, justice and posterity.
Yes.
Too. Now let's move on
Absolutely.
to politics. They say a house divided cannot stand on itself. There were divisions within the ruling CCM party. Do you see the former president's backers, late President John Magufuli, posing a serious threat to President Suluhu Hassan by undermining authority? And as the vice chairman of the opposition party, are you willing to exploit these divisions?
First of all, I don't think there are any divisions within the ruling party to speak of. At least I've not seen any evidence of the divisions you refer to. Secondly, those who backed President Magufuli have been, in my view, totally discredited with the kind of revelations that are now coming out into the open, some of them at the behest of the new president, about what really happened behind the scenes during the Magufuli years. Basically, in short, senior government figures were senior figures in the security forces and in the Brejino administration were given a carte blanche to carry out murder and mayhem. Now, these things are coming out in the open, and I think Magufuli and his legacy will be totally tarnished. Those who backed him are on the defensive. His legacy, if there ever was any, is in tatters. I don't think they pose any threat to President Samia Suluhu Hassan as such.
Talking about
as to what we will do, we in the opposition and my party in particular, I think all we have asked the new president to do is to remove the illegal ban on political activity that was imposed in 2016 by the then President Magufuli. We just want to do normal political party in a normal political activity in a normal democratic society. We are not demanding for anything that is not provided for by Tanzanian law. We just want that. We just want democracy.
Now, talking about the legacy of the former President John Pombe Magufuli, commentary from all over the world and political commentators within Tanzania and the East Africa region is always polarized when you look at the legacy of the former president. Some said he was a champion against corruption. They call him the bulldozer, that he was able to take on multinational corporations, especially in the mining industry, that were reaping Tanzania off and weren't paying enough royalties. Do you see any positives in his legacy, or you can never see any good in the former president?
there is absolutely nothing positive of the Magufuli's toxic legacy. And let me explain this. The so-called war on corruption was nothing short of mafia-style shakedown of the business community. Magufuli, all that Magufuli wanted was money, to get money to finance his white elephants, to finance his petty projects. And the people with money are the business community. So Magufuli went after the business community big time. Hundreds of business people were framed up with horrendous economic crimes, with money laundering, with corruption, with tax evasion, and not a single one of them has ever been proved in a court of law to have committed any of those horrendous crimes.
But the money recovered went back to the state coffers to help with infrastructure projects. And you did mention that some of these projects are white elephants. Why do you say so?
They are white elephants precisely because they are white elephants. These are the kind of projects which are very impressive on sight, but if you scratch a little, you scratch the surface a little, if you query their economic rationale, there is none. The country has been saddled with a multi-billion-dollar debt. The national debt, our foreign debt, grew fourfold during the 5 years of Magufuli compared to the 10 years of President Jakaya Kikwete. So this mafia shakedown of the business community was done in the name of corruption. I repeat, not a single case was ever proved in a court of law. All these people who were charged with these offenses were forced to pay up money to admit crimes they had not committed just in order to be released from these terrible prisons. It's mafia shakedown. Okay. That was not the fight against corruption.
Now, Mr. Tundulisu, you're still in Nairobi. You attended a book launch recently on parliamentary processes in East Africa. Now, you've been a vocal proponent for constitutional reform in Tanzania. You were a member of parliament for 10 years. How much changes were made during your time as an MP? And what are the specifics of the type of reforms you advocate for?
I will start with the first question, which I think is very good. In our entire parliamentary history, people will probably write this, historians will write of the period from 2010 to 2015, those 5 years, or perhaps I will start from 2005 to 2015, that was the period when the Tanzanian National Assembly, Tanzania's parliament, came of age. It was a period when parliament became bold, when it made sure that government was held accountable. And I'm proud to say that in my stint, my first parliamentary stint in 2010 to 2015, I was on the forefront of the effort to make sure that Parliament played its rightful role to ensure that the government of the day was held accountable for its actions. Now, as regards to what needs to be done to bring the country back on a track, a democratic track, we need a new democratic constitution. We have been calling for democratic constitutional reforms for over 30 years. 30 years ago, a commission of inquiry headed by the then Chief Justice of Tanzania, appointed by President Mwinyi at that time, recommended that it was high time for the country to have a new constitution. 30 years later, we are still fighting for the same. So a new democratic constitution, a new free democratic electoral system, a country that treats its people with dignity, that respects rights, that respects rule of law, a nation that is at peace with itself and at peace with her neighbors and with the world. That is what we want to see.
Now, finally, Mr. Tundulisu, this is a question lots of people want to hear. What's the future for Tundulisu in Tanzanian politics? Will you be taking another shot at the presidency in the future?
I have said, I've been asked that question a number of times, and my answer has been, and it is now to your question, that the most important thing currently, the most urgent order of the day is to get the country back on a constitutional, on a democratic path. And that means getting ourselves the kind of constitution that we deserve. Once we have the new constitutional dispensation that we deserve, then the question of whether I will have another go at the presidency will be answered. I have said it publicly that me and my party will not go to the next election with the kind of constitution that we have currently and with the kind of electoral commission and the electoral system that is in place. That will be courting another disaster like last year's. So constitutional reform, a new constitution with an independent electoral commission and a fair and just playing field for all political players, then and only then can we talk of going to future elections, contesting future elections.
On that note, I would like to say a very big thank you to you, Mr. Tundulisu, for taking time out to talk to us at News Central Exclusive. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we wish you all the best with your recovery.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And that wraps up today's edition of NC Exclusive. Our guest was Tanzanian opposition leader, Mr. Tundulisu. See you next time on NC Exclusive.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
Hello, welcome to NC Exclusive. I'm Benga Aboroa. Our guest this evening is a social justice advocate and politics and governance expert with a career of over 30 years rooted in law and spanning across social activism, judicial, constitutional and political arenas. She is an accomplished lawyer and politician who played an important role in the founding and development of Kenya's pluralistic politics in a bid to expand democratic spaces in Kenya in the 1980s and 1990s. The role of women in Kenya politics has greatly benefited by her efforts and exemplary career as a founder of organizations such as the League of Kenyan Women Voters and leading women's advocacy through FIDA. She actively lobbied for increased women representation in political positions. Her prestigious career in public service stems from her 20 years as a member of parliament in Gichugu constituency, Minister of Water and Public Works, and Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. Beside her impeccable track record, she holds an LLB from the University of Nairobi and master's degree in business administration from USIU Africa. Our guest this evening is Honorable Martha Wangari Karua, Senior Counsel, former Minister of Justice of the Republic of Kenya and the National Rainbow Coalition Party leader. A very good evening to you, Honorable Karua. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Georges blocked the Constitutional Amendment Bill, popularly known as the Building Bridges Initiative, BBI. They said it was irregular, illegal, and unconstitutional. President Kenyatta and Raila Odinga argued that the proposed constitutional changes will end the winner-takes-all structure of Kenyan politics, which is often followed by deadly violence. You described, in your words, you described the BBI project as a return to autocratic rule, to an imperial president who is not accountable to parliament, and to a parasitic model of government. What is your opposed to it?
That there is an appeal that has been argued, heard, and I was part of the team that responded to that appeal by the government. And the ruling will be on 20th of August. So I am constrained not to discuss too much the matters that are pending before the court. But it is true that I've been a vehement opponent of BBI, and the description you have given is exactly what it is. We feel that these are not amendments to the Constitution, but a backdoor overhaul of the Constitution. These are the questions pending before the Court of Appeal. Whether it is proper for the BBI proponents to change the system of governance in our country from a purely presidential system of government with checks and balances to taking us back to a hybrid system where you merge the executive and parliament by appointing ministers, cabinet ministers from parliament, where you allow the executive to extend its hand into the judiciary through a purported judicial ombudsman who we view as a government inspector going to interfere with judicial independence. And literally, these are the questions pending before the court. And if I were to put it together, I would say the question is, can Parliament or anybody for that matter alter the basic structure of the Constitution without resorting to the primary constituent power of the people?
Which is the people.
This would entail explaining to the people through civic education the proposed amendments, giving time for discussion and giving time for the public to distill, so that the amendments passed are not passed through the hype of politicians interpreting and telling them what it is, yet in reality, it may not be what it is. We all know that when politicians are explaining, there'll be exaggerations, outright falsehoods. People need to know exactly what they're doing, and those are the arguments pending before the court.
Now, Honorable Karua, the BBI initiative consisted of a series of 78 proposed amendments to the Constitution of Kenya. You described it as a backdoor way of trying to get the Constitution amendment. It spanned 13 of its 18 chapters. You were instrumental and you were part of the constitutional amendment process that birthed
before the court. But you put it very well that the BBI was proposing 78 amendments. You will, in Kenya, we all know that our independence constitution was mutilated, dissembled through amendments to a point where it was unrecognizable. The total amendments since independence in 1963 to 2010, when we reviewed and enacted a new constitution, were 39. Compare that to the 78 being proposed in a single sweeping amendment bill. Can the public understand or distill 78 combined amendments spanning 13 of the 18 chapters of the Constitution? Are these amendments or an overhaul? Those are the questions. An amendment, through definition of what an amendment is in English language, are minor alterations. Can the 78 proposals amount to minor? And I've already said they affect the chapter on system of government. They add to the powers of the executive. And when we overhauled our constitution, one of the thorny issues was that we did not want an imperial presidency. We wanted power to be shared. There are many, many other areas which go to the basic structure of the Constitution, people's power of amendment. Can the executive use the clause that gives people power, the ordinary citizen, power to initiate constitutional amendment to bring proposals? Or should the executive only use the route through Parliament, which is open to them, by tabling amendments? In any event, all executive bills brought in Parliament have priority. Why does the executive want to play the role of executive and usurp the powers of the citizen? These are the questions pending before the court. And once again, I will say that this, in our view, is an attempt to dissemble, to overhaul, to replace our constitution before implementation. And that is the question pending before the court, whether the court finds in our favor or finds in the favor of the proponents of BBI.
And like you said, it doesn't even take a constitutional lawyer to know that a lot of the proposals violate the principles of separation of powers. But we'll find out on August 20th when the court decides on the appeal for BBI. Now, Honorable Karua, let's move to Linda Katiba. It's an initiative you lead. It's a citizens' voluntary initiative that is determined to resist the government-led move to unconstitutionally cannibalize and overthrow the will of the people of Kenya, encapsulated in the 2010 Constitution. What is Linda Katiba and why does it matter?
Linda Katiba is an association of individuals and organizations that feel duty-bound to defend the Constitution of Kenya. After all, the Constitution of Kenya places a duty on every citizen to uphold and defend it. So we are just doing our civic duty of defending the Constitution. And if we don't do that, then we will have ourselves to blame. And I am glad that among the citizens who went to court and who got a judgment in the High Court, halting BBI and declaring it unconstitutional, were two conveners of Linda Katiba and many other citizens. Even now, we are calling upon citizens to remain vigilant because as we speak, Parliament has initiated a parliamentary initiative to amend the Constitution, which again violates the basic structure. Parliament is a party to the ongoing litigation, which is at the appeal stage, and it's quite mischievous of them to table similar amendments to those declared by the High Court unconstitutional without waiting for the ruling of the court on the 20th. In our view, they are in contempt of court, and their efforts from the Linda Katiba initiative to ensure that this again is prosecuted.
Karua, away from BBI, we've seen quite a disturbing pattern of the current administration of President Uhuru Kenyatta disobeying court orders, the Minguna incident and others. As a former Justice Minister and Senior Counsel, what is the implication of this? And are there any justifiable reasons to disobey court orders, national security reasons perhaps?
May I begin by saying there are no justifiable circumstances of disobeying a court order and undermining the rule of law. In fact, the executive is actually entrenching impunity. The 2010 Constitution, among other things, was expected to usher in an era of nurturing the rule of law and constitutionalism. And what is being done by the executive in Kenya today undermines the constitution. And that is why we are justified as citizens to doubt that there can be any genuine move to amend the constitution, which the executive keeps on viewing and openly describing as an inconvenience. One of our arguments before the court, which is pending ruling, is that the executive, the modern day dictators, are actually using constitutional amendments to undermine the rule of law and constitutionalism. And we view the proposals by BBI as such, and we are waiting to see whether the court rules in our favor, because these are purported amendments that actually undermine the very constitution, undermine constitutionalism, undermine the rule of law. Anybody interested in the constitution, whether an individual or the executive, would begin by honoring the constitution, not violating it. Serial violators of the constitution cannot be the best people to purport to give, in quotes, good faith amendments to the constitution. And for the cyclic violence after post-election violence in Kenya and tension, its root cause is electoral injustice. Nothing in BBI
addresses that,
proposes anything to cure that. So it is not genuine to say that BBI will cure electoral injustice. All we need from where we sit is to implement the constitution faithfully, make sure that elections are transparent, fair, accountable, and verifiable. And that will sort out the issue of who is a winner. There cannot be two winners on any election, on any context. There should be one winner.
You're watching News Central Television, reaching you live from Lagos, Nigeria. I am Samuel Ajibola, and I'll be taking a stab on the news on News Central Television. These are some of the major stories making the headlines across Africa at this hour. Headlines begin in South Africa, where the Zulu queen, Mantfombi Dlamini Zulu, who died last week, has been buried in a private ceremony in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province. She was appointed regent of the country's largest ethnic group in March, following the death of her husband, King Godswill Zwelithini. Staying in South Africa, the factional battles within the ruling African National Congress spilled over into the parliament on Thursday, when President Cyril Ramaphosa was asked about his party's status. In West Africa, Nigeria's head of security, defense and intelligence agencies appeared before the nation's Senate in an effort to reveal ongoing strategies aimed at tackling an escalating insecurity crisis. We head to East Africa, where authorities in Kenya will today launch the first ever national wildlife census. The exercise will be officially launched in East Kenya at Shimba Hills National Reserve. The judges of the International Criminal Court, ICC, on Thursday sentenced Dominic Ongwen, a former commander of Uganda's Lord Resistance Army, LRA, to 25 years of imprisonment. Ongwen was sentenced for war crimes and crimes against humanity. We head to North Africa, where the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, has signed an agreement with the Libyan Ministry of Water Resources to extend their collaboration in the water sanitation and hygiene wash project. And those were some of the major stories across the continent at this hour. Make sure you follow News Central TV on social media platforms at News Central TV. You can also watch live or stream on StarTimes channel 274. I am Samuel Ajibola, and thanks for watching.
Wait, these are not having read news. I love Swahili.
I am Tokwe Tadila. I am an actor.
I'm Muhalima Sheho. I'm a writer.
Ndile, I'm an author, researcher.
Nadia Korafor, and I'm a writer.
Kolatibosom. I'm a linguist and a writer.
Mona Al-Tahawi. I'm an Egyptian-American feminist author, revolutionary and activist.
Onias Landveld. I'm a spoken word artist.
Tanya Evanson. I'm a poet, performer, producer, arts educator, and director of the Banff Center Spoken Word Program.
Be Young, Anita Africa, and I am a Jamaican born and raised dub poet.
Keep watching News Central TV.
News Central.
News Central TV.
News Central.
Keep watching News Central TV. Africa first.
Africa first.
Africa first.
Africa first.
Africa first.
Hello and welcome to African Headlines. I am Rita Omodia. African Headlines at this hour begins in East Africa, where we understand that Uganda, France and the United Nations have signed an agreement to support the UN Academy for Peace Operations. Adonai Yebare, Uganda's permanent representative at the UN, says the academy based at Entebbe will train UN peacekeepers to use unmanned aerial systems for intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance in UN peacekeeping operations missions. The training will be supported by the Ugandan military and the Ugandan Civil Aviation Authority, the country's air transport regulator. Ayebare adds that the East African country looks to more collaboration with the UN Under-Secretary General for Operational Support and French government on the use of digital technology in peacekeeping operations. Now in West Africa and still talking security matters, the Nigerian army says it has put effective measures in place to ensure the attack on its defense academy, where a 7th senior officer was also abducted, will not repeat itself again. The Commandant General of the academy, Ibrahim Yusuf, while speaking to some members of parliament, says that efforts are ongoing to free the kidnapped officer. Yusuf informed members of the House of Representatives Committee on Defense that the military has improved the security of the academy and other military formations within the northwest state of Kaduna.
The ongoing efforts that we are making to recover the abducted officer, and also the measures that the academy is currently placing to ensure that this does not ever occur again. Many senior retired and serving military officers have called. They have also visited the academy because the academy is very dear not only to the military but to Nigeria as a whole.
I'm also assured by his contribution and the measures they've put into place that this will never happen again. It's an unfortunate incident that happened, but Nigerians should be rest assured that NDA is safe and other military formations along that area has been duly fortified. We're still expecting further reports from them. We've had them to come up with some other documents and further and better particulars so that we can also see and reassess.
In the meantime, a federal lawmaker has described the crisis in Nigeria's north-central state of Plateau as an act of genocide against ethnic minorities resident in the state. Dacheng Bago spoke to Newsmen in Nigeria's parliament, saying there has been a lot of misinformation about the crisis, which has resisted attempts to bring lasting peace to the state. He accused the federal government of lacking the political will to tackle the crisis, saying it is being misrepresented as a farmer's headache crisis when it is actually a situation where ethnic minorities are battling to end an attempt to grab their lands and communities.
The name people have tried to cage the killings on the plateau as a communal clash. I've never seen, if it's a clash, me and you, we are fighting, we'll all go with wounds. But it's not a clash. It's pure genocide. pure land grabbing, pure chasing people from their lands. So it's not, and you see, that's the angle, that if government is not seriously proactive in addressing the issue with its own name, and you're looking at it as clash, and you come to the clash is when two people are fighting, you come to the table, you settle them. But this is, I have not seen where the people that are having clash, farmers, headers clash, when it is farmers that are always chased from the land, killed on their lands are being grabbed, and you call it clash and crisis. I don't understand. The real situation, the real issue on the ground is genocide.
And staying in West Africa, the French Defense Minister Florence Parly has warned Mali against entering into a deal with a Russian security firm. There have been reports that Mali's military rulers are close to hiring mercenaries from the Wagner Group. Parly described the potential deal as extremely worrying, saying it would undermine efforts by France to counter the jihadist threat in the region. Wagner is believed to be operating in several African countries as Russia seeks to increase its influence. Its employees are fighting rebels in the Central African Republic, where Russian companies have secured mining concessions. Now to our continued coverage of the coronavirus pandemic across the continent. We have it that in North Africa, Morocco has reported 2,785 COVID-19 cases, bringing the total infections in the country to 908,349. The Moroccan Ministry of Health says the death toll rose by 65 to 13,683, while 1,684 people are in intensive care units. It adds that the total number of recoveries from the COVID-19 in Morocco increased by 3,958 to 866,064. Meanwhile, over 20.36 million people have received the first vaccine shots against COVID-19, and over 16.87 million people have received 2 doses. Meanwhile, Nigeria has surpassed 200,000 cases from the coronavirus pandemic 18 months after the first case was identified in the West African country. This is according to the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, NCDC, which says Nigeria's COVID-19 cases has reached 200,057. The Public Health Agency also registered 519 additional COVID-19 infections on Tuesday from 14 states and the Federal Capital Territory, FCT. The NCDC adds that the new cases represent an increase from the 387 cases reported on Monday. Of the new cases reported, Lagos had 120, Ondo 110, Rivers 74, and the FCT 58. Now in East Africa, South Sudan has received 152,950 doses of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine through the COVAX facility. These single-dose vaccines are the third batch of vaccine shipments to South Sudan from the COVAX facility. Avo TV Channel 23, Vision 247, Free TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Rita Omodia.
With over 200 million in population and an estimated annual growth rate of 3%, Nigeria is the world's most populous black nation. Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy, also covers about 92.4 million hectares of land, while 53% of its population lives in rural areas. Also, with a youth bulge of about 60 to 70% under the age of 35 years, Nigeria also boasts of a strong youth population. However, this population accounts for a high unemployment rate, with Nigeria's federal government unable to provide jobs for its teeming youths. Many believe agriculture holds the key to solving an acute food scarcity and an escalating unemployment rate. However, 70% of Nigeria's farming population are women. Nigeria's federal government has in the past initiated several intervention programs in agriculture aimed at reaching out to this demography. Unfortunately, a visit to some rural communities revealed programs initiated by government does not trickle down to the grassroots. Comfort Sunday, one such farmer, also the head of the Federal Capital Territory Small Scale Women Farmers Association, said women
PDP ne to APC ne ana ruling yanzu don program din ya zo zaka ji daga area council ne ya zo wurin chairman zaka ji wanda ya yi mishi zabe sune za zabe su je su yi program din ba duka ce community duka program ya zo abun amfani mu samu babu.
I heard of COVID-19 loan. I heard of survivor fund. I even hear of one going on now. They are giving to women 20,000, but I don't even know how they do it. They go about it.
Many of them also add that beyond not having access to intervention from Nigeria's federal government, they face other challenges like inadequate finance, lack of access to fertile farming lands, and a lack of access to farming inputs.
We need support. We women, we need support. May government give us grants. We will do better than what we are doing now. We want to do, but some people don't even have access to even go for the business because na business.
A visit to the Buzunkure axis of Abuja, located at the Kuje Area Council, where we met Laraba Obadiah, reveals that despite billions budgeted by Nigeria's federal government, women farmers across the federal capital face the same challenges.
Shekara 25 wanda na fara noma ban samu wani taimako ba na gwamnati ba. Sai dai muna fama ne. Ina samu kadan takin zamani da na amfani yanzu san sai da mudu in yi amfani da shi. Ban samu na gwamnati ba. Ban taba je ba, ban samu wannan labari na ba da kudi rance aje a yi noma da shi ba.
Some of them say they think they can achieve a lot with help from government. They insist that farming is the only occupation they have known all their lives, which has helped them to cater for their families.
Gaskiya muna neman taimako a gurin government da shike mun mata mun ba da kai mu cewa za mu yi gwannan domin mun duba mun gani gwannan yana taimako yana yi mamu taimako. Idan mutum ya yi gwana abinci ya fita ba za mu sha wahalan abinci kuma ba, ba zan je kasuwa jin saya ba. To damuwa mu yaya za mu yi nane za mu irin shuki wani lokaci kaman especially shinkafa ba mu same shi na iri wanda za mu yi shuki. Wani beans kuma muna kokarin mu yi amma ba mu samu irin.
With agriculture generating about 21% of Nigeria's gross domestic product in 2015 alone, many will admit more can still be done to support women farmers. While Nigeria's federal government insists hundreds of billions have been invested to support farming at the grassroots level and tackle a rising poverty challenge, it is clear that government needs to change its strategy to reach this target farming population.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a
justice advocate and politics and governance expert with a career of over 30 years rooted in law and spanning across social activism, judicial, constitutional, and political arenas. She is an accomplished lawyer and politician who played an important role in the founding and development of Kenya's pluralistic politics in a bid to expand democratic spaces in Kenya in the 1980s and 1990s. The role of women in Kenya politics has greatly benefited by her efforts and exemplary career as a founder of organizations such as the League of Kenyan Women Voters and leading women's advocacy through FIDA. She actively lobbied for increased women representation in political positions. Her prestigious career in public service stems from her 20 years as a member of parliament in Gichugu constituency, Minister of Water and Public Works, and Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs. Beside her impeccable track record, she holds an LLB from the University of Nairobi and master's degree in business administration from USIU Africa. Our guest this evening is Honorable Martha Wangari Karua, Senior Counsel, former Minister of Justice of the Republic of Kenya and the National Rainbow Coalition Party leader. A very good evening to you, Honorable Karua. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, George's Block Constitutional Amendment Bill, popularly known as the Building Bridges Initiative, BBI, they said it was irregular, illegal, and unconstitutional. President Kenyatta and Raila Odinga argued that the proposed constitutional changes will end the winner-takes-all structure of Kenyan politics, which is often followed by deadly violence. You described, in your words, you described the BBI project as a return to autocratic rule, to an imperial president who is not accountable to parliament, and to a parasitic model of government. What is your assessment of the BBI initiative, and why are you vehemently opposed to it?
I'll begin by saying that there is an appeal that has been argued, heard, and I was part of the team that responded to that appeal by the government. And the ruling will be on 20th of August. So I am constrained not to discuss too much the matters that are pending before the court. But it is true that I've been a vehement opponent of BBI, and the description you have given is exactly what it is. We feel that these are not amendments to the Constitution, but a backdoor overhaul of the Constitution. These are the questions pending before the Court of Appeal.
People, including a lieutenant colonel of the Burundian army, were killed, Jesus, in an attack on Sunday night where they were traveling to Muravya area, 40 kilometers northwest of the political capital in Jitato. That's sad. To security matters now, officials of the United Nations and the Malawian government says a female peacekeeper has been kidnapped. What is going on? Why is everybody being killed and kidnapped? In an attack by an Islamist militia in eastern Congo, northern Kivu province. We move to the West Africa where the Nigerian president, I heard West Africa, my heart is now pounding. We move to West Africa where the Nigerian presidency has confirmed an attempt to break in by burglars, an attempted break-in by burglars into the official residence of the President Chief of Staff, Professor Ibrahim Gambari. From the west to South Africa, where the African National Congress is demanding a public apology from its suspended Secretary General, is Magushale. I'm not from that country. Party President Cyril Ramaphosa announced this in the closing remark of a special party, National Executive Committee, which considered it a step-aside rule. I'm coming. To a bit of sports now. The draw for an expanded 2022 Women's African Cup of Nations is out, with defending champions Nigeria set to face neighbors and its rival Ghana. And this, my friends, are some of the stories making the headlines in Africa. Make sure you're following the Central TV on social media platforms on News Central TV. You can also watch us live at StarTime channel 274. Many thanks, and I continue to be Williams Chiyoke Uchemba. That is all for today's news. Take care, and I'll see you tomorrow.
President Muhammadu Buhari is seeking the approval of Nigeria's National Assembly to borrow about $4 billion and 710 million euros. These loans would be taken from bilateral and multilateral organizations to fund the deficit in the 2021 budget. The president, in a letter to the Senate, said the request is an addendum to the 2018 to 2020 borrowing plan. He also asked the lawmakers to approve grant components of $125 million. It was in July this year that the Nigerian Senate approved the federal government's 2018 to 2020 external borrowing rolling plan of $8.3 billion and 490 million euros. Donor-funded projects under the plan, according to the president, would be financed through sovereign loans from the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, the French Development Agency, and the China Exim Bank. This new request is scheduled to be financed through sovereign loans from the same international lenders and others. These loans will add to a series of borrowings which the government intends to use to try to jumpstart an economy disrupted by COVID-19 and dollar shortages. Our topic today is Nigeria seeks fresh loans. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Joining me is Gbolahan Olojede. He's an economist and the executive director, DMA Advisory and Management Services Limited. Gbolahan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get straight to it. Now, Africa's largest economy came out of its second recession since 2019 in the fourth quarter of 2020. Growth is fragile. All revenue is fluctuating and down. So are you surprised that Nigeria is seeking another loan to fund its budget deficits?
No, I'm not surprised. That is because Number one, we had what you call the borrowing plan. There was a 2018 to 2021, I think, borrowing plan, which has been presented before. And I think we had an approval of the National Assembly. The second part is that when the budget for this year was presented, we saw that there was a deficit of over 5 trillion naira. And the government had said, look, I don't have the revenues for these 5-point-something trillion. I will be borrowing both internationally and locally to be able to make it up. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that they're now saying, okay, that money where I say I go borrow, I'm now about to borrow it. So that's why I'm not surprised.
There is an expected budget deficit of 5.6 trillion naira. The Buhari administration is looking to finance this largely from foreign and local borrowings. Now, budget deficits are not so uncommon, and many countries are experiencing them in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Is Nigeria's deficit too much? Is it cause for concern, or is it to be expected and really there's no need for alarm?
What is really of concern is not Nigeria's deficit, it is Nigeria's revenue. Nigeria's revenue is horrible. I was somewhere yesterday where I was talking about the Nigerian police, and we were comparing them with the Metropolitan Police. That was when I found out that the budget for the Metropolitan Police for 1 year is about twice the total Nigerian revenue. I don't know if you got that. About 40,000 plus policemen in the UK. The amount voted for them is bigger than the entire amount that federal government of Nigeria wanted to spend. So the main problem is actually revenue, not the deficit, like you rightly said. So what we must be asking is, at the heart of it, how do we deal with the revenue issue? And then the second part is that what can we do to ensure that we don't have to borrow as much? Because the trend of borrowing is unsustainable. At some point, the risk profile is increasing, then we will have to start borrowing at a higher cost. At some point, you might even get to the market and the creditors are saying, look, I'm not so sure you guys will be able to pay back, so I don't have any money for you. We don't want to get to that point. So what do we need to begin to do to ensure that we borrow less? Now, let me also say that our approach of waiting for every 3-4 months and then the government says, I want to borrow. When they come like that, it has become a short-term need. There is not much you can do in a short term. Where we need to plug in is when we have a plan. So if there's a 3-year borrowing plan, 3 years gives us a room to maneuver. So we can say, oh, within these 3 years, don't borrow this amount. Let's give this to the private sector to handle. Let's do a tax credit to finance this particular road. Let's sell this asset. Government has huge number of assets that are totally unproductive, useless assets that we can realize, and we can begin to use it to part fund our deficit. So there are so many things we can do, but once the borrowing becomes, it comes on a short-term basis, there's nothing you can do in a short term, but a 3-year plan gives us the room to maneuver, and that is what we must plug into. So what is the next 2-3 years of borrowing that we have right now on the table? If we have something like that, let's plug into it and provide solutions. It's not enough to just be saying, oh, borrowing. What are the solutions? And that time frame gives us the opportunity for solutions.
Let's quickly go deeper into this budget deficit aspect of the conversation. Now, Nigeria is basically spending more money than she's making and has been for some time. The country is then borrowing to close the gap between income and spending, which increases the national debt. But there are some that believe that borrowing can boost a sluggish economy. And people often point to the U.S. as an example of a country that has consistently run deficits over the past decade. Particularly for Nigeria, what are the effects of a budget deficit on the economy?
For us, the problem is so glaring, and it comes in several forms. Number one is that because we're not earning enough revenue, this debt, this borrowing becomes a burden. We have seen situations in which 80%, 90% of our entire revenue is being used to service loan, it means that we don't even have money for development. We don't have money for capital investment, which is why we go out there to go and borrow again, to come and, in fact, we are probably already borrowing to handle some of our recurrent expenditure. Because when you look at the 2020 numbers, the 2020 numbers shows that the total revenue we made, the retained revenue of the federal government of Nigeria, could not cover the non-debt recurrent expenditure of the country. So we might already have started to borrow to do some recurrent expenditure or to borrow to repay another loan. It's already in that system. So we cannot continue along this line. There is nothing wrong in deficits. Several countries that are doing well in the world are also borrowing to do things. But we must get our revenues right. Right now, it is horrible.
Borrowing in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, and literally every country on the planet does borrow. But in Nigeria's case, we tend to hear alarm bells and sirens and more when it's announced that the country wants to borrow. What's the issue with Nigeria in particular borrowing?
Fantastic. I will remind you that when the government presented a borrowing plan, 3 or 4 year borrowing plan, I cannot remember precisely now, there was an item that stuck to my head. I think it was revamp of NTA, something like that. And it was some huge numbers. So I must be asking myself, if I turn around or I digitize NTA, should it be a priority borrowing project? Is that a borrowing project? It is totally different from if I'm borrowing to do a critical road, or I'm borrowing to do a critical rail infrastructure. Anybody who has gotten on the Lagos-Ibadan rail will tell you that they had a fantastic experience. If I must move both goods and people across the country efficiently, which is part of what we enable the economy, it is good borrowing, because at the end of the day, the enablement that will be delivered into the economy will actually help us to generate revenue for the government. When businesses are doing better, they are in a more comfortable position to pay you taxes and to employ people, and not, so all the benefits will come when we borrow right and we spend it right. So one of the questions we must ask about this particular borrowing is, can we see the list of the projects?
All right, Gbolahan, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get a bit deeper into this loan issue and look at what it means for the economy. You're watching Business Edge. Welcome back. Now, still with me is Gbolahan Olojade. So, Gbolahan, let's continue this. Now, in July, lawmakers gave approval for government to borrow $8.4 billion, 490 million euros, and now we're in September. The president has asked for more, and he says that this fresh request is to address emerging needs and ensure that all critical projects approved by FEC as of June 2021 are incorporated. What do you think the national economic needs could be that would push Nigeria to borrow again after July's round?
That is why we should be asking for these details. Nigeria indeed has, if you just use infrastructure alone, the deficit that is in that space alone, even if we continue to borrow for the next, at the rate we are for the next 10 years, I'm not sure if we'll be able to deal with up to 50% of what we have that is missing on ground. But you see, in the process of saying we are borrowing for critical capital expenditure, there might be several other items that are not considered critical, that are being smuggled into it. And it is only when we know exactly what this list is. If somebody says, oh, I'm borrowing $8 billion, okay, $8 billion, that is fine. What are the breakdown of this $8 billion? What are the specific projects that are there? When we know the specific project, somebody say, oh, part of this money is going to be deployed to the coastal rail from Lagos to Calabar. Fantastic infrastructure. But there are some other things that when you see it, you know that this is money for the boys. And Nigerians can write and say, we do not support that this particular one be funded. So if it is about the need is there, plenty. What we should focus on is our revenue and the sustainability of the pattern of borrowing that we have right now. In the short term, we may have to borrow, but because we have a plan, the plan, if you have a 3-year plan, it allows us to ensure that no matter that gap, what that gap is, that we don't have to borrow the entire gap over the 3 years.
The 2018 to 2020 funding plan is meant to boost the Nigerian Economic Sustainability Plan, which in turn is to fund Nigeria's COVID-19 recovery. The $5.9 billion plan was approved in order to stimulate and diversify the economy, retain and create jobs, and also extend more protections to the poor. How successful do you think the NESP has been so far?
I don't think we have done much because if we have done much, it should have started to reflect in certain parts of the economy, which we are not yet really feeling it. That is not to say that we have not done some stuff. Some infrastructure have been delivered. There is no doubt about that. And part of our question should also be towards that. If somebody has come to us and said, I want to borrow, and they borrow this much, he said, this thing I'm borrowing are for this project, this project, this project. As citizen, as civil society organization, as National Assembly, we must be able to query those projects and the level of delivery that we have for those projects. I'm going to do 100 kilometers of road, and that is why I'm borrowing this 100 million. Can we ask, so how many kilometers of those that the road has been delivered? Our jobs do not end and should not end at the level of, talking about the loan. Whenever they come, we say, oh, you want to borrow, you want to borrow. That is not where it stops. So after they have borrowed, has the money been applied to what they said it was going to be applied to? What is the level of performance at any point in time? When did they say they were going to conclude it? Have they concluded it accordingly? All those things are things we must measure as citizens. If we just focus on that point in time when they say they want to borrow, and then after that, we drop the ball, we're going to move forward.
Now, there have been a lot of criticisms of some of the previously obtained loans because of terms, conditions, and even transparency issues. What kind of terms do you think would be most favorable to Nigeria and Nigerians when it comes to loans and borrowing?
Number one, any money we're asking for has to be concessionary. So all those international loans with FX implications, the rate has to be concessionary. And for some of this loan, I actually think we must think about hedging. I can imagine foreign denominated loan that were taken when the naira to the dollar was 200 naira. And today, that same naira to the dollar is 500 naira. There's a huge FX risk with international borrowing. So part of the term, part of the negotiations for contracting this loan should be to also think about the hedging mechanism for us so that we don't run into the FX risk that are associated with international borrowing in an unstable FX situation. Then we need to define certain ratios by ourselves, apart from the generally the popular one that by World Bank and all the rest of it. I believe that by now we should have determined internally and made public what is the maximum debt service ratio that is acceptable to us as a country. What is it? The debt service to the revenue of because the temptation, which is what I hear government say all the time, is to want to peg our borrowing to the GDP and say our debt to GDP ratio is sustainable, it's still very low, one of the lowest in the world, lowest in Africa, all those kind of things. This is not the right way to go. That is because the GDP that we are indexing our loan to, there's a lot of distortion about it. Nobody repays loan from GDP. You repay your loan from revenues, and the revenues are bad. So what is the ratio of the loan to that revenue that is acceptable to us as a country? We need to begin to define those clearly, and let it guide us. Maybe we even push us to go and look for more revenue.
Let's take a quick trip down memory lane. So in October 2005, the Olusegun Obasanjo administration was successful in getting debt relief from the Paris Club. The country got debt relief worth $18 billion and an overall reduction of its debt stock by about $30 billion. How did Nigeria end up with now $87 billion and more of debt as of June this year? Even though, yes, this does include debt from all levels of government.
We were borrowing and borrowing recklessly. We were not applying the money we were borrowing to what we said we were going to apply them to. So we were literally just wasting the money. That is it. If we have been borrowing for 15 years, and you look in that space and you say, oh, maybe we'll be borrowing for infrastructure, and you're asking yourself, so where is the infrastructure? Till now, the power is still not exactly there. A whole lot of road issues are still there. You know, a whole lot of our infrastructure, even Apapa is still there. I think well enough in holding government accountable to some of these borrowings that they have been making. And it may be a gap that we need to start thinking of how to fill. If we don't fill that gap, we will continue to ask ourselves, 5 years down the lane again, we will ask ourselves, okay, all that money that we talked about today, how come we cannot see the infrastructure? So more accountability must be demanded from the people who are doing the borrowing or who are implementing all this project. Borrowing itself, like anybody will say, is not a bad thing. It is what you use the money for and how you are accountable for the money that you have borrowed that is the problem.
The last question seems a very simple one, but it's probably one of the biggest questions many people are asking themselves. Gbolahan, how does Nigeria get its borrowing under control to a manageable and sustainable level?
What we need to do is to, within the plan, when we make a plan, 2-3 year plan, it gives us time to maneuver. So within that time, we number one, bring in increased private sector participation. So, for example, we have tax credits being used to fund some roads. So Nigeria did not have to borrow for that. We have a whole lot of initiative under the Federal Ministry of Works, which is going in that direction as well. Number two, we can begin to consider all sorts of concessions and PPP arrangement. Number three, we are able to negotiate some of the existing loans that are either maturing or are short-term. We negotiate it such that we can extend the maturity a little bit. What that does is that it reduces the burden of what we are paying here and make it smaller and less burdensome to us. So we can also exit a whole lot of federal government assets that are useless and unproductive, from real estate to government enterprises that are not doing anything. Let's exit some of these assets and get in some money. This is easier for us than to just be doing all this short term. Oh, you want to borrow again? No, you can't borrow. No, that one is not going to work.
Thank you so much, Gbolahan Olojade, economist and executive director, DMA Advisory and Management Services. Thank you for joining me on Business Edge. And that's the edition of Business Edge that we have for you today. As always, don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. And if you've missed any of our conversations on the biggest economic, financial, and of course, business stories coming out of the continent, head to our YouTube channel and of course, subscribe. I'm Tolulokwe Adela Balogun. I'll see you again soon.
According to the United Nations Development Programme, Ghanaians generate over 1 million tons of plastic waste each year, and only between 2% and 5% of this plastic waste gets properly recycled. Many places within the country lack the infrastructure to safely dispose of plastic waste. The UNDP has emphasized the urgent need for waste management and plastic pollution in Ghana to be addressed.
Welcome to...
Taking up this challenge are two Ghanaian brothers, Boy and Bill Bamfo, who are upcycling plastics into sustainable fashion, going into Ghana's many markets, picking up plastic waste and converting them into these. When asked, one of the brothers told me that it started off as an expression of art, but as time went by, they realized that it was also an act of caring for the environment.
When it started, it was more like art and trying to make a fashion statement, that I wanted to create something that people can relate to, something that was around us. So that was the motivation first. I did my research and like someone drew my attention to it. The clothes you're doing is more like you're upcycling. I was like, what's the meaning of upcycling? So I had to do my research and saw that, oh, what we were doing. And back then, we were not packing much like rubbers or plastics from the market. It was just a few ones that we had that we picked around that we were trying to experiment with. So when I studied and got to know what upcycling and sustainable fashion is and what we were doing, I decided to go extra to now enter the markets, because every week I go to the market like 3 times to buy stuff, and I see so many rubbers and like plastic bags all around, like a lot of them, like heaps of them. So I was like, okay, then I have to actually broaden the idea. If this goes a long way to save the environment and prevent the plastics from being littered around and being discarded, and we can do this with it, then I'm going to broaden the idea and pick up lots of the plastic bags, and do something with it.
In Ghana, about 300 tons of plastic waste is generated daily, many of which end up in the ocean. Here, Elisha is seen gathering the plastics from the markets and tells us what keeps him motivated.
I feel like a lot have been done with fashion already, with materials and stuff, and we want to cause some kind of stir with our clothes and also save the environment as well.
Sustainable fashion, also known as eco-fashion and refashion, is a movement and process of fostering change to fashion products and the fashion system towards greater ecological integrity and social justice. Sustainable fashion concerns more than just addressing fashion textiles or products. It addresses the whole system of how clothing is produced, who produces it, and how long the lifespan of the product is before reaching landfill. Bill Bamfo, the second of the Bamfo brothers, showed us how the designs are created.
Not all the time we actually use plain rubbers. We actually mix it with African print and other fabrics to actually make it look nice. Like this is a raincoat. I just finished a raincoat, and you can see.
Let's see what I'm going to look like in this guy. Amazing stuff.
And after which, I had the opportunity to put on one of the collection, and it was an amazing piece of work, ready to go, ready for use. Although these efforts by Boy and Bill alone does not solve the plastic pollution crisis in Ghana, but it is definitely a good way to start.
So if I give you 100 CDs, I can keep this guy?
Definitely. Not this sample though, because this is our first sample.
I understand.
Yes.
Benneth Joseph for New Central TV.
This is really amazing. It's really amazing.
You're watching News Central Television, reaching you live from Lagos, Nigeria. I am Samuel Ajibola, and I'll be taking a stab on the news on News Central Television. These are some of the major stories making the headlines across Africa at this hour. Headlines begin in South Africa, where the Zulu queen, Mantfombi Dlamini Zulu, who died last week, has been buried in a private ceremony in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province. She was appointed regent of the country's largest ethnic group in March, following the death of her husband, King Godswill Zwelithini. Staying in South Africa, the factional battles within the ruling African National Congress spilled over into the parliament on Thursday, when President Cyril Ramaphosa was asked about his party's status. In West Africa, Nigeria's head of security, defense and intelligence agencies appeared before the nation's Senate in an effort to reveal ongoing strategies aimed at tackling an escalating insecurity crisis. We head to East Africa, where authorities in Kenya will today launch the first ever national wildlife census. The exercise will be officially launched in East Kenya at Shimba Hills National Reserve. The judges of the International Criminal Court, ICC, on Thursday sentenced Dominic Ongwen, the former commander of Uganda's Lord Resistance Army, LRA, to 25 years of imprisonment. Ongwen was sentenced for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
I am Tokwe Tadila. I am an actor.
I'm Halima Sheho. I'm a writer.
Shindele, I'm an author, researcher.
Nadia Korafor, and I'm a writer.
Kolatibosom. I am a linguist and a writer.
Mona Al-Tahawi. I'm an Egyptian-American feminist author, revolutionary, and activist.
Onias Landveld. I'm a spoken word artist.
Tanya Evanson. I'm a poet, performer, producer, arts educator, and director of the Banff Center Spoken Word Program.
To be young, Anit Africa, and I am a Jamaican born and raised dub poet.
Keep watching News Central TV.
News Central.
News Central TV.
News Central.
Keep watching News Central TV. Africa first.
Africa first.
Africa first.
Africa first.
Africa first.
Hello and welcome to News Central Now, reaching you live from Lagos, Nigeria. I am Rita Omodia. News Central Now at this hour begins in East Africa, where the Libyan Interior Ministry says it has arrested 109 migrants bound for Europe in the western city, Ziltan, some 160 kilometers east of the capital, Tripoli. The ministry says the migrants include 16 women and 2 children, adding that they are of Eritrean and Sudanese origin. It adds that legal measures were taken against the migrants. Migrants who were rescued at sea or seized by Libyan authorities end up in overcrowded reception centers across the country. Libya has been a preferred point of departure for immigrants wanting to cross the Mediterranean towards European shores since the 2011 uprising toppled Muammar Gaddafi and plunged the country into insecurity and chaos. Still in East Africa, we understand that Uganda, France and the United Nations have signed an agreement to support the UN Academy for Peace Operations. Adonai Yebare, Uganda's permanent representative at the UN, says the academy, based at Entebbe, will train UN peacekeepers to use unmanned aerial systems for intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance in UN peacekeeping operations missions. The training will be supported by the Ugandan military and the Uganda Civil Aviation Authority, the country's air transport regulator. Ayebare adds that the East African country looks to more collaboration with the UN Under-Secretary General for Operational Support and French government on the use of digital technology in peacekeeping operations. Now in West Africa, and still talking security matters, the Nigerian army says it has put effective measures in place to ensure the attack on its defense academy, where a 7th senior officer was also abducted, will not repeat itself again. The Commandant General of the Academy, Ibrahim Yusuf, while speaking to some members of parliament, says that efforts are ongoing to free the kidnapped officer. Yusuf informed members of the House of Representatives Committee on Defense that the military has improved the security of the academy and other military formations within the northwest state of Kaduna.
The ongoing efforts that we are making to recover the abducted officer, and also the measures that the academy is currently placing to ensure that this does not ever occur again. Many senior retired and serving military officers have called. They have also visited the academy because the academy is very dear not only to the military but to Nigeria as a whole.
I'm also assured by his contribution and the measures they've put into place that this will never happen again. It's an unfortunate incident that happened, but Nigeria should be rest assured that NDA is safe and other military formations along that area has been duly fortified. We're still expecting further reports from them. We've had them to come up with some other documents and further and better particulars so that we can also see and reassess.
In the meantime, a federal lawmaker has described the crisis in Nigeria's north-central state of Plateau as an act of genocide against ethnic minorities resident in the state. Dachung Bargo spoke to newsmen in Nigeria's parliament, saying there has been a lot of misinformation about the crisis, which had resisted attempts to bring lasting peace to the state. He accused the federal government of lacking the political will to tackle the crisis, said it is being misrepresented as a farmers-headed crisis, when it is actually a situation where ethnic minorities are battling to end an attempt to grab their lands and communities.
The name people have tried to catch the killings on the plateau as a communal clash. I've never seen, if it's a clash, me and you, we are fighting, we'll all go with wounds. But it's not a clash. It's pure genocide, pure land grabbing, pure chasing people from their lands. So it's not, and you see, that's the angle that if government is not seriously proactive in addressing the issue with its own name, and you're looking at it as clash, and you come to the clash is when two people are fighting, you come to the table, you settle them. But this is, I have not seen where the people that are having clash, farmers, headers clash, when it is farmers that are always chased from the land, killed on their lands are being grabbed, and you call it clash and crisis. I don't understand. The real situation, the real issue on the ground is genocide.
And Nigeria's out-of-school children has increased by 3 million more children within the last 1 year. This is as experts are calling for accelerated learning for many of these children in the country. One organization which is leading the initiative in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, is urging all stakeholders to collaborate with the government to address this worrisome trend. News Central's Idong Joseph tells us more.
Available data from Nigeria's Federal Ministry of Education says about 10.1 million children in Nigeria are currently out of school. Also, the United Nations Children Education Fund, UNICEF, says about 35% children in the country between the ages of 1 and 6 have never had early childhood education. While these figures present a worrisome situation to many, experts say it is a time bomb that needs to be nipped to the bud. With efforts needed by stakeholders to address this worrisome challenge, one organization says its 3-year training program for children without any formal education will go a long way to reduce out-of-school children in the country.
We're having the highest burden of out-of-school children. It's 10.5 million. That's a huge number. So programs like this is to bring to the knowledge of the world that we have a lot to do, and there exists a community like this somewhere close to the authorities, and also calling on the need for government to do all it can to provide education for this teeming number of youths.
About 50 children have already benefited from this initiative, targeting children from nomadic families. FlexiSafe Foundation says the success of the program brings to the front burner the need for accelerated learning for the children.
Accelerated learning program meets them in their community. It helps the people in the community to buy into the project. Like you can see, all the mothers, all the people in the community are there. We assign them roles, and then we get very trained staff to come and train the children with basic numeracy, literacy, life skills. Once we are done with the project here, we train the community people how to access school, and because of the training the children have received, they are able to thrive very well in formal school.
So if you don't provide that access, they are still going to go out to school and they will be hawking and then they will be begging on the street. So what is the solution? UBEC now, I think, with collaboration with something like this, will now take it up to the executive secretary, will now form part of our report that the program is successful. But the challenge is, what is next? They need a primary school in this community.
With Nigeria's education sector already taking a hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, available estimates say about 3 million out-of-school children have been added in the last 1 year. Experts say whatever needs to be done fast. From Abuja, Idong Joseph, News Central.
Staying in West Africa, the French Defense Minister, Florence Parly, has warned Mali against entering into a deal with a Russian security firm. There have been reports that Mali's military rulers are close to hiring mercenaries from the Wagner Group. Parly described the potential deal as extremely worrying, saying it would undermine efforts by France to counter the jihadist threat in the region. Wagner is believed to be operating in several African countries as Russia seeks to increase its influence. Its employees are fighting rebels in the Central African Republic, where Russian companies have secured mining concessions. Coming up, Morocco reports 2,785 new cases of coronavirus. Details of this story and more after the break. Join us again. Now to our continued coverage of the coronavirus pandemic across the continent. In North Africa, Morocco has reported 2,785 new COVID-19 cases, bringing the total infections in the country to 908,349. The Moroccan Ministry of Health says the death toll rose by 65 to 13,683, while 1,684 people are in intensive care units. It adds that the total number of recoveries from the COVID-19 in Morocco increased by 3,958 to 866,064. Meanwhile, over 20.36 million people have received the first vaccine shots against COVID-19, and over 16.87 million people have received 2 doses. On the other hand, more than 200,000 Nigerians have now been infected with coronavirus 18 months after the first case was identified. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control disclosed this in its daily update, uploading on its website on Wednesday morning, where it put the total number of infections at 200,057. The Public Health Agency registered 519 additional COVID-19 infections on Tuesday from 14 states and the Federal Capital Territory. It said the 519 additional new cases in the country represented an increase from the 387 cases reported on Monday. The NCDC figures also showed 18 more Nigerians died from COVID-19 complications on Tuesday to push the death toll from the virus across the country to 2,637. And staying in Nigeria, the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency has introduced vaccination exercises during Sunday services across the country as part of efforts to increase COVID-19 vaccination coverage in the country. Executive Director of the agency, Dr. Faisal Shuab, disclosed this during a meeting with leaders of the Christian Association of Nigeria on Tuesday in Abuja. Speaking on behalf of CAN, the Executive Director of the Nigeria Interfaith Action Association, Dr. Sunday Onwuora, called on Christian leaders to partner with the government to promote acceptance of the vaccines. Now in East Africa, South Sudan has received 152,950 doses of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccines through the COVAX facility. These single-dose vaccines are the third batch of vaccine shipments to South Sudan through the COVAX facility. Elizabeth Acheo, South Sudan's Ministry of Health, says the vaccines will ramp up the ongoing vaccination program to prevent COVID-19 in individuals aged 18 years and above. The first batch of AstraZeneca vaccines were shipped through the COVAX facility to South Sudan on March 25. The second batch of 59,520 AstraZeneca vaccines donated by France arrived on August 31, and a donation from Sweden is slated for arrival soon. Still ahead on the news, 76th UN General Assembly opens in New York. We'll give you details of that story after the break. Join us again.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
Now in World Wrap, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the COVID-19 pandemic has proven to be the most challenging period the world has seen. He was speaking at the 75th session of the General Assembly, close to usher in the 76th session. Passing on the gavel to the new Assembly President, Abdullah Shahid of the Maldives, Guterres saluted his predecessor, Volkan Bozkır. The UN chief credited Bozkır for prioritizing a sustainable recovery and supporting countries as they rebuild systems shattered by the pandemic. Shahid opened the 76th session, noting that people can find the courage to push forward, get vaccinated, and spur a greener, more inclusive pandemic recovery.
On recovering from COVID-19, vaccinating the world is my top focus. We simply must close the gap to vaccine access. With this in mind, I will be holding a high-level thematic debate on vaccine equity with leading experts and world leaders. On my second ray of hope, rebuilding sustainably from the pandemic, I will work with the Economic and Social Council, the United Nations system, and international financial institutions to help ensure that the socio-economic recovery is forward-thinking, that it is bluer, greener, and more resilient.
Must accelerate. We need to speed up our response to COVID-19 with vaccines, treatment, and equipment for all, not only those with the most. We need to invest in all systems that support human development, healthcare, nutrition, water, education, and protection, and full equality for girls and women. We need countries to commit and live up to bold climate targets at COP26 in Glasgow. The war on our planet must end. The wars on each other need to end too. It's time to focus on fighting humanity's common enemy, the pandemic. The members of this assembly must speak with one voice. We need peace now.
Now, Haiti's Prime Minister Ariel Henry has been banned from leaving the country amid an investigation into his alleged involvement in the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. A prosecutor is seeking charges against Henry, who has been asked to explain his links with a key suspect in the killing, Joseph Felix Badiou. Prosecutors say records show the two men had multiple phone calls hours after the assassination. Moïse was shot dead after gunmen stormed his private residence in a suburb of the capital, Port-au-Prince. Moïse's death triggered a political crisis which was exacerbated when a huge earthquake struck the south of Haiti a month ago. In other news, Tanzania's central bank says the East Africa country recorded a 4.9% economic growth in the first quarter of 2021. The Bank of Tanzania says this was lower than 5.9% recorded in the corresponding period in 2020. The Apex Bank says the growth was driven by construction, transport, agriculture, manufacturing, mining, and quarrying activities. It adds that the economy is expected to continue improving owing to ongoing. And now Nigeria's table tennis star Haruna Quadri has set a new African record as the first player on the continent to be ranked in the ITTF's top 15. In the latest ranking by the table tennis record of finishing the top 16 in 2018. And that's all on the news at this hour. Do follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store. You can also watch News Central live on StarTimes channel 274, Avo TV channel 23,